In a nondescript office in Quantico, Virginia, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit maintains a database that most Americans don't know exists. It tracks patterns, cross-references missing persons reports with unsolved homicides, and monitors geographical clusters of unexplained deaths. The analysts working these cases operate under a sobering assumption that right now, at this very moment, there are dozens of serial killers actively hunting victims across the United States. Not historical figures from decades past, but people living among us today, unknown and uncaught. This is just one of several realities about our world that exists largely outside public awareness. Facts that intelligence agencies, military planners, and demographers understand but rarely discuss in plain terms. What follows are 5 documented phenomena that reveal uncomfortable truths about the world we inhabit in 2024. The FBI's definition of a serial killer is specific: someone who murders 2 or more victims in separate events with a cooling-off period between killings. By this metric, the Bureau estimates that between 25 and 50 serial killers are operating in the United States at any given time. This figure comes from the agency's analysis of unsolved homicide data, patterns in missing persons cases, and statistical modeling based on historical arrest rates. The actual number globally is significantly higher, though precise figures remain impossible to establish given variations in law enforcement capabilities and reporting standards across different countries. These aren't the theatrical killers portrayed in Hollywood productions. Most contemporary serial killers target vulnerable populations: sex workers, homeless individuals, drug users, people whose disappearances often go unreported or uninvestigated. The FBI established the Highway Serial Killings Initiative in 2009 after recognizing that long-haul truck drivers represented a particularly concerning category. The initiative has connected over 850 victims to approximately 425 murder cases along American highways, with many cases still open. The mobility afforded by interstate trucking routes, combined with the transient nature of victims, creates ideal conditions for serial predation. The clearance rate for homicides in the United States has declined dramatically over the past 50 years. In 1965, police solved approximately 91% of homicides. By 2020, that rate had dropped to around 54%. This decline reflects multiple factors: reduced witness cooperation, strained police resources, and the increasing sophistication of criminals who understand forensic science from popular media. For serial killers, this environment provides cover. When individual murders remain unsolved, patterns become harder to detect. By the time law enforcement connects multiple victims to a single perpetrator, years may have passed and dozens of people may have died. The most recent comprehensive study by the Murder Accountability Project, a nonprofit organization that tracks homicide data, identified approximately 2,000 serial killers operating in the United States between 1980 and 2018. Of these, roughly 2,400 were eventually caught. The remaining 600 either died without being identified, stopped killing, or continued to operate undetected. Thomas Hargrove, the project's founder and a former investigative journalist, developed an algorithm that analyzes FBI homicide data to identify potential serial killer activity. His system flags clusters of unsolved murders with similar characteristics: same victim demographics, same methods, same geographic areas. As of 2020, the algorithm had identified over 220,000 unsolved murders in the FBI's database that potentially connected to serial killers. On January 24, 1961, a B-52 Stratofortress bomber carrying 2 Mark 39 hydrogen bombs broke apart in midair over Goldsboro, North Carolina. Both weapons fell from the disintegrating aircraft. One landed in a muddy field, its parachute having deployed properly. The other plunged into a marshy area near Big Daddy's Road. Air Force crews recovered the first bomb intact. The second weapon's uranium core remains buried in the swamp beneath approximately 180 feet of mud and water. The Air Force suspended recovery efforts after determining that retrieval was impractical and that the weapon posed no significant contamination risk. The site remains under government monitoring. This incident represents one of at least 32 Broken Arrow events, the military's designation for accidents involving nuclear weapons. The Department of Defense officially acknowledges 6 nuclear weapons that remain lost and unrecovered. Beyond the Goldsboro weapon, these include a Mark 15 bomb lost in the waters off Tybee Island, Georgia, in 1958 when a B-47 bomber collided with an F-86 fighter during a training exercise. The weapon, containing approximately 400 pounds of conventional explosives and enriched uranium, fell into Wausau Sound. Despite multiple search operations, including a 2001 effort using advanced sonar equipment, the bomb has never been located. The weapon reportedly contained a capsule of fissile material, though the Air Force has provided contradictory statements about whether the capsule was installed at the time of the accident. In 1950, a B-36 bomber returning from a simulated combat mission over Alaska experienced severe icing conditions. The crew jettisoned their Mark IV nuclear weapon over the Pacific Ocean and then bailed out. The bomber crashed in mountainous terrain in British Columbia. Search teams recovered the wreckage but never found the nuclear weapon, which presumably sank in the Pacific. In 1956, a B-47 carrying 2 nuclear weapons disappeared over the Mediterranean Sea during a mission from MacDill Air Force Base in Florida. Neither the aircraft nor its crew were ever recovered. The 2 weapons remain on the seafloor somewhere in the Mediterranean. The Soviet Union lost significantly more nuclear weapons than the United States, though exact numbers remain classified in Russian archives. In 1968, a Soviet Golf-class submarine designated K-129 sank in the Pacific Ocean approximately 1,160 miles northwest of Hawaii. The submarine carried 3 nuclear-armed ballistic missiles. In 1974, the CIA launched Project Azorian, an operation using the specially built ship Hughes Glomar Explorer to recover the submarine from a depth of 16,500 feet. The operation successfully raised a portion of the submarine, though the section containing the missiles reportedly broke apart during recovery and fell back to the ocean floor. The exact disposition of the nuclear warheads remains classified. Beyond lost weapons, there are concerns about suitcase nukes, portable nuclear devices that Soviet special forces allegedly developed during the Cold War. In 1997, Alexander Lebed, a former Russian national security advisor and general, testified before the U.S. Congress that the Soviet Union had manufactured approximately 100 suitcase-sized nuclear weapons, each yielding up to 1 kiloton. Lebed claimed that when he conducted an inventory of these weapons in the 1990s, he could only account for 48 of them. Russian officials disputed his claims, and subsequent investigations failed to confirm the existence of these weapons. However, the possibility that portable nuclear devices exist outside official control remains a persistent concern for intelligence agencies. In December 2021, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released data showing that life expectancy in the United States had declined for the 2nd consecutive year. American life expectancy fell from 78.8 years in 2019 to 76.1 years in 2021, a decline of 2.7 years. This represented the sharpest 2-year decline in life expectancy since the period from 1921 to 1923, which coincided with the Spanish influenza pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic drove most of this reduction, but other factors contributed, including increases in drug overdose deaths and homicides. The global picture showed similar patterns. According to the World Health Organization, global life expectancy declined in 2020 and 2021 for the first time since the organization began systematic tracking in 1950. The pandemic killed an estimated 15 million people globally in 2020 and 2021 when accounting for both direct COVID-19 deaths and excess mortality from disrupted healthcare systems. Some countries experienced even more dramatic declines than the United States. Russia's life expectancy fell by nearly 4 years between 2019 and 2021. Peru and Mexico saw declines exceeding 3 years. The life expectancy decline represented more than just pandemic mortality. In the United States, drug overdose deaths reached record levels during the pandemic, with over 107,000 deaths in 2021, a 15% increase from 2020. The proliferation of synthetic opioids, particularly fentanyl, drove this increase. Fentanyl is approximately 50 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. Drug trafficking organizations began mixing fentanyl into heroin supplies in the mid-2010s because its potency allows for easier smuggling. A small quantity produces many doses. By 2021, fentanyl was present in approximately 66% of all overdose deaths. The pandemic also disrupted routine healthcare, leading to delayed diagnoses and missed treatments for chronic conditions. Cancer screenings declined by approximately 90% during lockdown periods in 2020. Cardiovascular disease deaths increased by 4.8% in 2020 compared to 2019, partially due to COVID-19, but also reflecting reduced emergency care utilization as people avoided hospitals. The American Heart Association estimated that approximately 40,000 excess cardiac deaths in 2020 were not directly caused by COVID-19, but resulted from pandemic-related disruptions to care. In November 2022, China announced that its population had declined for the first time since 1961. The country recorded 9.56 million births and 10.41 million deaths in 2022. resulting in a net population decrease of 850,000 people. This marked a demographic turning point for the world's most populous nation. China's total fertility rate, the average number of children a woman has during her lifetime, fell to 1.09 in 2022, far below the replacement rate of 2.1 needed to maintain stable population levels. The decline reflected decades of one-child policy enforcement combined with rising education levels, urbanization, and economic pressures that made child-rearing increasingly expensive. China's demographic crisis represents an acute version of a global phenomenon. According to United Nations population data, 61 countries and territories had fertility rates below replacement level in 2022. This includes virtually all developed nations. South Korea recorded the world's lowest fertility rate at 0.78 children per woman. Japan stood at 1.34. Italy recorded 1.24. Even countries that have implemented aggressive pronatalist policies have failed to reverse declining birth rates. Hungary, which offers generous subsidies to families with children, maintains a fertility rate of 1.59. Singapore provides substantial cash payments and childcare support, but records a rate of 1.05. The demographic implications extend beyond simple population decline. As birth rates fall, populations age rapidly. Japan provides a preview of this future. In 2022, 29.9% of Japan's population was aged 65 or older, the highest proportion in the world. The country had approximately 90,000 centenarians, and adult diaper sales exceeded infant diaper sales starting in 2013. Japan's working-age population has been shrinking since 1995, falling from 87.3 million to 74.5 million by 2022. This creates an inverted demographic pyramid where a shrinking workforce must support growing numbers of retirees. The economic consequences of population aging are severe. Social security systems designed when populations were young and growing now face structural insolvency. In the United States, the Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be depleted by 2034 according to the Congressional Budget Office. At that point, incoming payroll taxes will cover only 77% of scheduled benefits unless Congress acts. Similar crises loom in Europe and Asia. China's pension system faces a funding gap that some economists estimate could reach $8.6 trillion by 2050. Attempts to address declining birth rates through immigration face political resistance and practical limitations. Japan, which traditionally restricted immigration severely, modified its policies in 2019 to allow more foreign workers. However, the country still struggles to attract immigrants in sufficient numbers. Language barriers, cultural differences, and concerns about social cohesion complicate large-scale immigration. Even countries with more immigration-friendly policies face challenges. Germany accepted over 1 million refugees in 2015-2016, but integration difficulties and political backlash limited subsequent intake. The alternative to immigration or increased birth rates is economic contraction. Smaller populations mean smaller workforces, which produce less economic output. Declining populations also create deflationary pressures as consumer demand shrinks. Japan's economy has struggled with deflation since the 1990s, a phenomenon some economists attribute partially to demographic decline. The country's GDP grew at an average annual rate of just 0.9% between 1990 and 2020, compared to 4.4% between 1970 and 1990 when its population was still expanding. Some demographers argue that population decline could benefit environmental sustainability by reducing resource consumption and carbon emissions. However, the transition period creates unprecedented challenges. Economies structured for growth must adapt to contraction. Infrastructure built for larger populations becomes underutilized. Rural areas depopulate as young people concentrate in cities, leaving behind aging communities with inadequate services. In Japan, approximately 9 million homes stood vacant in 2018, over 13% of the housing stock. Entire villages have been abandoned as populations aged and died without replacement. These 5 phenomena, serial predators operating undetected, nuclear weapons lying lost on ocean floors and in swamps, declining life expectancy reversing decades of progress, and populations aging into unsustainable demographic structures represent challenges that transcend traditional crisis categories. They emerge not from single catastrophic events, but from accumulated systemic failures, technological risks, and demographic transitions. They persist because they operate on timescales longer than political cycles, and because addressing them requires resources and sustained attention that democracies struggle to maintain. The serial killer problem reflects a broader crisis in American criminal justice. declining homicide clearance rates that allow violent criminals to operate with reduced risk of capture. The lost nuclear weapons represent Cold War legacies that remain unresolved, physical reminders that the technologies developed for mutual assured destruction created risks that persist regardless of geopolitical changes. The life expectancy decline demonstrates the fragility of public health gains that took generations to achieve but can be reversed in months by pandemic disease or social dysfunction. The population crisis reveals that prosperity and education, while beneficial in countless ways, create demographic patterns that threaten the economic systems that generated them. These are not problems with straightforward solutions. Improving homicide clearance rates requires rebuilding trust between law enforcement and communities, increasing resources for cold case investigations, and developing better forensic technologies, all expensive and politically complex undertakings. The lost nuclear weapons will likely remain lost, their recovery too dangerous or expensive to justify given the low probability of accidental detonation or discovery by hostile actors. Reversing life expectancy declines requires addressing drug addiction, improving healthcare access, and controlling pandemic disease, each a generational challenge. Solving the population crisis demands either convincing educated, economically stressed populations to have more children despite rational incentives pointing in the opposite direction, or managing economic contraction without political collapse. What these phenomena share is their invisibility to most people in their daily lives. Serial killers target the margins of society. Lost nuclear weapons sit in places no one visits. Life expectancy is a statistical abstraction until illness strikes. Population aging occurs gradually enough that each year seems little different from the last. Yet their cumulative effects shape the world's future as surely as more visible crises. They represent the long-term consequences of choices made decades ago. The decision to build thousands of nuclear weapons and fly them constantly on airborne alert, the creation of criminal justice systems that prioritized some communities over others, the construction of social security systems based on demographic assumptions that no longer hold. Understanding these realities doesn't require accepting fatalism. The FBI continues improving its ability to detect serial killer patterns through better data analysis. The Department of Defense maintains monitoring programs for lost weapons and has implemented stricter protocols to prevent future losses. Public health authorities are developing better pandemic preparedness based on COVID-19 lessons. Governments are experimenting with pro-natalist policies and immigration reforms to address demographic challenges. Progress is possible, but it requires acknowledging uncomfortable facts and committing to solutions that may take decades to show results. Which of these disturbing facts concerns you most, and why? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden realities shaping our world.